Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. You're talentless. I hope you find some kind of job, he said, with a smirk that cut deeper than any knife. Then he laughed. That awful, smug laugh. And just like that, I was fired. I'm Veronica, 27, marketing strategist, and until a week ago, the one-woman engine behind Fairmount Creative's skyrocketing client engagement numbers. I'd been with the company for 3 years. Not long by some standards, but long enough to know every nook of our brand playbooks and how to spin even a mediocre campaign into a viral sensation. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional, but apparently not exceptional enough for my new boss. Brandon Carter, MBA poster child, fast-tracked from some East Coast firm to revitalize our department. He came in with the energy of a wrecking ball and the finesse of a toddler with scissors. He called it streamlining. I called it bulldozing. I knew the moment he laid eyes on my project proposal, the big one, the one I'd poured my soul into, that he saw something valuable. He asked for it 3 days after starting, said he wanted to see what kind of legacy work we were sitting on. I gave it to him, naively. 2 days later, I heard him pitching it in the main conference room. My words, my strategy, my data, but not my name. He'd rebranded it under a new project title and presented it as his own brainstorm to the executive team, and they ate it up. That afternoon, I was called into his office. The air was cold and smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. I thought maybe he was going to thank me, maybe even offer a lead role now that he saw what I could do. Instead, he sat me down, smiled, and said those unforgettable words. You're talentless, Veronica. I hope you find some kind of job. My stomach dropped. I blinked. Laughed, thinking it was some twisted joke. You're firing me? Effective immediately, he said. We'll have HR escort you out. No explanation, no paperwork review, no handover. Just a final, cruel laugh and a wave toward the door. I walked out carrying a cardboard box and my dignity, both trembling under the weight of betrayal. My colleagues stared, wide-eyed, as if I were a ghost walking through the office. No one said a word. Not even Jules, my supposed work friend, who had nodded along in every meeting where I had laid out that campaign. I cried in the parking lot. Not just because I'd lost my job, but because I'd let him take my work. I should have seen it coming. Brandon was the kind of man who measured success in how many people he could outmaneuver, not how many he could lift. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not forever. Not when I still had the original draft saved on my personal drive, timestamps, email chains, even a video of my dry run presentation I had sent to Jules for feedback. I had proof. I just needed a plan, because what Brandon didn't know was that the campaign he stole had been tailored specifically for a client I'd built a close relationship with. And that relationship? It was about to pay off in ways he never imagined. The truth is, it wasn't just Brandon. The pressure had always been there. It sat like a weight on my chest from my first week at Fairmount Creative. I loved marketing, the thrill of creativity, the adrenaline of pitching a big idea, the deep satisfaction of watching engagement metrics climb like a perfectly played symphony. I got a rush seeing something I designed spark real conversations online. But the leadership? It was a minefield laced with smiles and passive aggression. At first, I told myself it was just growing pains. Every job has politics, right? But then the small things started stacking up. Deadlines dropped at 5 p.m. on a Friday. Can you tweak this real quick? Emails that turned into 5-hour rewrites. Managers taking credit for work in meetings while I sat quietly beside them, face frozen in a polite smile. The word team was thrown around like a shield to hide the fact that only some of us were expected to bleed for it. Before Brandon, it was Lisa. She wasn't overtly cruel, just cold in a way that felt calculated. She never said thank you, never offered feedback unless something went wrong, and even then, it was more about her reputation than fixing the issue. She once told me, "You're really good at executing, Veronica. Just try not to outshine the pitch lead." I remember laughing like it was funny, but it wasn't. It was a warning. Even back then, I stayed late, came in early, missed birthdays, dinners, weekends. I told myself it was temporary, that I was investing in my future. But each year, the investment felt more like a slow leak in a tire I didn't know how to patch. What killed me wasn't the hours. It wasn't even the lack of recognition. It was that quiet, gnawing helplessness, like screaming underwater, watching others crumble and knowing I couldn't help them because I was barely keeping myself afloat. There were nights I'd get home, drop my bag on the floor, and just sit there in the dark. No music, no lights, just me and the echo of silence, wondering how I'd ended up in a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. The worst part was, no one ever did anything about it. HR was a performance, lip service. I once reported an inappropriate comment from a director during a client dinner, something I still hear replayed in my mind sometimes, his laugh, the way the others looked away. HR thanked me for my courage and said they'd handle it. Nothing happened. 2 weeks later, I found out I'd been passed over for a client lead role. Not the right fit, they said. I started keeping a digital journal. Just little notes. The time my idea was pitched by someone else. The time I was left off a thank you email for a campaign I built from scratch. The time Brandon told me I didn't have the polish for executive roles. That one hit harder than I'd expected. Not because I believed it, but because it wasn't the first time I'd heard it. Too soft, too emotional, too much, and somehow still not enough. When Brandon arrived, he didn't change the culture, he just gave it sharper teeth. Where Lisa had been distant, Brandon was dismissive. He smiled when he insulted you. He laughed after cutting someone down in front of the team. He was the kind of man who used charm like a blade and called it feedback. From the very first meeting, I could feel his eyes sizing me up, not as a colleague, but as a threat. He asked questions he already knew the answers to. He interrupted me mid-sentence in meetings, and when I tried to raise concerns about his leadership style, I was told I needed to adapt to new energy. So I adapted. I made myself smaller, spoke less, smiled more, said great idea to things I'd already suggested a week earlier. I became a version of myself I didn't even recognize just to survive another day without conflict. And yet, I still loved the work. That's what made it so cruel. I loved the art of it, the dance of pulling numbers into a narrative, the creativity of spinning strategy from raw data, the moments when a client's eyes lit up because they saw their brand in a way they never had before. It was my language, my gift, and I gave it away to people who treated it like a free buffet they didn't have to thank the chef for. Sometimes I wondered if anyone else felt it, the exhaustion behind the smiles, the careful tightrope walk between too bold and too invisible. But no one said anything. We clapped at meetings. We said, "So proud of this team" on LinkedIn. We had birthday cupcakes and Zoom happy hours. And beneath it all, we were quietly unraveling. I wish I could say I saw Brandon's betrayal coming. But the truth is, by the time it happened, I was already too numb to be surprised. But I wasn't numb enough to let it go. Not this time. Maybe it was the way he laughed when he fired me, or how easily he stole my work, polished it just enough to pass it off, and then tossed me aside like I was just some intern who'd wandered in off the street. Maybe it was the way no one even looked me in the eye as I left, as if my erasure was something to politely ignore. I went home and didn't cry that night. I stared at my ceiling for hours, every heartbeat a drum roll, and somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, something in me clicked. Cold, sharp, final. I wasn't going to let Brandon walk away with everything I built. I spent the next day combing through my files, emails, Slack logs, screenshots of the original pitch deck, the one he rebranded as his own. I had timestamps. I had receipts. But proof alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan. I needed someone who still had access. Someone who could help me from the inside. There was one name that kept circling in my mind. Nate. Nate was one of the few people at Fairmount I actually trusted. Smart, observant, deeply sarcastic, and always 2 steps ahead of whatever nonsense was happening in the office. We'd bonded early on over mutual eye rolls during meetings and late-night editing marathons. He was the kind of guy who didn't say much in team calls, but noticed everything. I still had his number. When I texted him, "Got a minute? Need to talk. It's important." He responded in less than 10 seconds. We met at a coffee shop near the office, the kind with indie music and overcomplicated menu boards. He was already there when I arrived, sipping a black coffee and scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up as I sat down. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "I saw something worse," I replied. "Brandon." He smirked. "Ah, the charming Grim Reaper of productivity. What happened?" I told him everything. The pitch, the theft, the firing, the box walk. His smirk faded slowly until his face was still. When I was done, I sat back. "I want to take him down," I said, "but I need help." He stared at me for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know I've been thinking about quitting anyway," he said. "So if I'm going to go out, might as well go out with a bang." "So you'll help?" "Once you have a plan," he said. "You come to me with something concrete, and I'm in." I left that coffee shop feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. Sharp, deliberate purpose. Nate's promise echoed in my mind. Once you have a plan, I'm in. And I intended to make that plan bulletproof. I wasn't going to walk into a gunfight with a stick. I wanted precision. I wanted pressure points. And I didn't just want Brandon gone professionally. I wanted him wrecked, personally. Because people like Brandon, guys who float through life on charm and well-timed manipulation, they don't just succeed at work. They build reputations, networks, whole identities carefully crafted around the illusion of control. So I started there. His image. Brandon had never been shy about his personal life. He brought it into the office the way some people bring lunch. Casual, loud, always a little too much. We all knew his wife's name was Elise. We'd heard about their destination wedding in Mexico, the cottage in the Berkshires, the aspirational lifestyle he curated on social media like it was a second resume. Perfect couple, perfect house, perfect Instagram reels with perfectly placed cappuccinos and dog filters. But no one's that perfect, not really. I created a burner account that night. No name, no connections, just a digital ghost. And I started watching. Elise's page was public. She posted regularly, interior design tips, skincare routines, inspirational quotes about trust and communication. The irony wasn't lost on me. I scrolled for hours, gathering names, cross-referencing likes, noting her favorite places. They had a couples therapist, a dog named Waffles, a shared fitness tracker challenge. And then I found it, her Pinterest board. Elise's Home Vibes, it read. Soft neutrals, ceramic dishware, books arranged by color, a whole folder dedicated to resetting boundaries after betrayal. That one made my breath catch a little. Curious. I bookmarked it. Brandon, for all his bravado, had a blind spot, his wife. He talked about her like she was a trophy he'd already won. But Elise? She wasn't blind. Her post had started to shift recently. Fewer pictures of the two of them. More solo brunches. One caption read, "Sometimes silence is clarity in disguise." The cracks were there. They just needed a little pressure. Next, I dug into his circle. I still had access to the old Slack archives. Brandon had once bragged about his college buddy, Mark, who now worked in finance and got them VIP reservations at all the best spots. A few hours of digging, and I had Mark's LinkedIn. From there, it didn't take much to find the rest. Brandon's weekend basketball group, his preferred whiskey bar, even a comment he left on a Reddit thread under a not-so-anonymous username. I built a map, friends, habits, vulnerabilities, everything that made Brandon feel untouchable. And then I smiled to myself, because now he wasn't. I didn't need to destroy Brandon's marriage. I just needed to make Elise wonder. Doubt is a slow poison. It starts as a whisper, a flicker of suspicion, and then grows until it eats away at everything. And Brandon? He was exactly the kind of man who couldn't function if his little castle of perfection started to crumble. He needed to be admired, worshipped. If his wife started pulling away, started asking questions he couldn't answer, it would mess with his head. And that's exactly what I wanted. So I got to work. First, I created another burner account. This one wasn't blank. It was curated, just enough to pass for a real person. An interior designer, early 30s, based in Boston. Tasteful selfies, comments under design posts, a few vague captions about private clients and long nights. Her name was Rhea Langston. Then I followed Elise. Not immediately, not too fast. I liked a few of her posts, ones about wellness and trust. 2 days later, I liked a picture of her and Brandon from a vacation last summer. No comments, just a subtle presence. Elise followed back. That was my window. I waited another day, then sent the first message. Nothing aggressive, just vague. Rhea Langston. Hey, this is super random and probably nothing, but I saw your husband at Marlowe's last Thursday. Just wanted to say he was with someone who looked really comfortable with him. I could be wrong. Hope that's okay to say. Ignore if it's weird. I knew exactly what I was doing. Elise didn't respond right away, but she read it. I watched the status change, then I waited. 2 days later, she posted an Instagram story, one of those long text backgrounds, white on black. It said, "Loyalty isn't proven through words, it's revealed in silence." And just like that, the seed was planted. Next, I sent a second message, slightly more pointed, different tone. Rhea Langston. Sorry, again, not trying to stir anything. It just seemed off. They were laughing, touching his arm a lot. Maybe it was work, but it didn't look professional. I just thought you should know. I deleted the account 3 hours later. She couldn't trace it, but the doubt would stay. That weekend, Brandon didn't post anything. No brunches, no dog park photos, no Sunday morning coffee pics with Elise's manicured hand in the background. Silence. On Monday, I heard from Nate. Dude, he texted, you might have actually done something. Brandon came in looking like hell, rumpled shirt, eyes bloodshot. He barked at Jules over a typo and locked himself in his office for 2 hours. I just smiled. It had begun. Destroying Brandon's family wasn't my main goal. Honestly, it wasn't even my second or third. I'm not a monster. I wasn't trying to ruin lives for sport. But if I could shake his world just enough, rattle the foundation he stood so smugly on, then maybe, just maybe, I could tilt the playing field back to level. Because the truth is, I didn't really lie to Elise. Brandon did flirt with his coworkers. He flirted constantly, shamelessly, like it was part of his job description. I can't count the number of times he made offhand comments in meetings. You look too good to be working this hard. Or, careful, Veronica, that brain of yours is getting dangerous. It was always said with a grin, wrapped in just enough plausible deniability to stay untouchable. I wasn't the only one he treated that way. He'd leaned too close when Jules was trying to explain a slide deck. He once offered to walk Charlotte to her car after a late client call, even though she clearly said no. There was always something lingering under the surface with him, entitlement, ownership, like our discomfort was part of his entertainment. So, no, I didn't fabricate anything. I just reframed it. And if Elise was smart, and she seemed like the kind of woman who was, she'd start to notice what had always been there. The late texts, the overnights in the city, the sudden, mysterious, networking dinners that didn't quite line up with any calendar events. If she started asking questions, all the better. Because if Brandon was stressed at home, that meant he'd be distracted, off balance, and distracted men make mistakes. That was what I needed. I didn't want to crush him all at once. I wanted to make him unravel, bit by bit, thread by thread, and it was already working. Nate confirmed Brandon had been off his game all week, short-tempered, forgetful, unusually withdrawn. He missed a follow-up with a major client and blamed the assistant for not putting it on his calendar. The assistant cried in the break room. Brandon didn't apologize. He never did. But now? Now people were starting to notice. Nate and I met again, this time in a quiet corner of a library 3 blocks from the office. I brought my laptop. He brought his. We're moving into phase 2, I said. He raised an eyebrow. And that is? We weaken him at work. Nate leaned in, grinning. Tell me everything. I clicked open a file. Brandon's rebranded pitch deck, the one he stole from me. We're going to expose this, I said. But not directly, not yet. Leaks? Maybe, or better. Let someone else find it. We plant just enough for the execs to start doubting him, and once they do, we let gravity do the rest. He whistled low. You're terrifying. I'm precise, I said, and patient. Because if you really want someone to fall, you don't push them. You let them trip over the lies they built themselves. If the first part of my plan was about shaking Brandon at home, the second part was about cutting his legs out from under him at work. And for that, I had Nate. Brandon's entire professional identity was built on optics, slick decks, fast words, polished shoes, and that permanent "I've got this" smirk. But beneath it? He was careless, disorganized, chronically late. He was the kind of man who thought punctuality was for people below him. He strolled into meetings 20 minutes late with coffee in hand, as if the schedule would simply adjust to his presence. And for the longest time, it did. No one said anything. His assistant covered. His team padded calendars with fake buffers. Clients were kept informed of traffic delays that didn't exist. It was all part of the Brandon show, and we were expected to clap anyway. But that show only works when everyone's in on the lie. And Nate and I? We weren't anymore. We started small, subtle. Nate, who still had admin privileges on the scheduling platform, began cleaning up the calendar logs. Nothing major. Just adjusting timestamps to reflect the actual times Brandon arrived and left. Quiet changes. Undetectable unless you were looking. And then we started reshuffling meeting slots. Just a nudge here and there. A recurring leadership check-in that used to start at 10 a.m., now 9:15. A client review Brandon used to coast into by 11, moved to 9:45, exactly the time he was usually still sitting in traffic or trying to charm the barista into a free espresso. The beauty was in the plausibility. Meetings get moved all the time. People forget to check their updates. Nothing we did screamed sabotage. It whispered it. And in a place like Fairmount, whispers carried. Brandon started missing things. He walked into a quarterly client check-in 40 minutes late, sweaty and unprepared. The client was already leaving. Someone from the C-suite had filled in, clearly annoyed. The client's review? Disorganized, seemed distracted. Perfect. At first, Brandon barked at his assistant. Why wasn't I notified? She looked confused. She'd sent 2 emails. I know, because Nate saw them in the internal tracker. He had access to her outbox. She had done her job. Brandon just didn't look. Or worse, assumed she'd fix everything like she always had. The next week, we did it again. This time with an investor call. Moved from 11:30 to 9 a.m., buried between 2 soft holds on the calendar Brandon never looked at. He missed it entirely. By the time he realized, the call had ended and the investors were unimpressed. And then came the metrics. Nate started feeding me internal data Brandon was supposed to monitor. Client engagement dips, campaign errors, missed deliverables, all things he was glossing over in reports. I started assembling them like puzzle pieces, tying them back to the project he stole from me. My project. Because the truth was, Brandon hadn't just stolen a pitch deck. He'd stolen a living campaign with moving parts, partner relationships, and predictive algorithms that required regular tuning. And he wasn't doing the work to maintain it. He didn't know how. He was too busy playing executive to see the cracks forming, so I made sure the right people did. Anonymously, of course. At first, I sent just 1 email to a director I trusted, using an encrypted service. No name, just a note. There are inconsistencies in the Q3 engagement data, particularly in the project Brandon presented. Compare the pitch timeline with internal logs. You'll find discrepancies. I attached proof. Clean, professional, just enough to raise eyebrows. Within a week, Brandon was asked to review his methodology in a follow-up meeting. He didn't have an answer. By then, the whispers had started. Has he lost his edge? He's not the same lately. You think he's burned out? I didn't need them to think he was evil, just incompetent. Let them pity him. Let them doubt him. Because in a place like Fairmount, once the shine wears off, once you stop being the golden boy, they don't protect you. They replace you. Brandon was unraveling. You could see it in the way his shirt collars got looser, the way his hair lost its perfectly combed slick. He was still trying, still putting on the show, but the cracks were there now, right under the surface. And what made it worse for him, what I knew was eating him alive, was that he didn't understand why. He was used to being untouchable, used to brushing off mistakes with a laugh and a scapegoat. But this was different. This was pressure from all sides. Clients doubting his reliability, directors scrutinizing his data, his own wife giving him cold stares instead of warm smiles. His once flawless life had started to fray, thread by painful thread, and he had no idea that I was holding the scissors. Nate told me Brandon had started pulling people into his office randomly, trying to talk things through. Said he seemed distracted in meetings, like he was waiting for something to explode. He snapped at interns, forgot names, sent a report to the wrong client with the wrong branding, one of my old clients no less. Dark period, Nate called it. He's spiraling. But me? I was soaring. While Brandon was busy scrambling to salvage his kingdom of chaos, I had quietly moved on. Up, in fact. I'd accepted an offer at Larkin Rowe, one of the most respected creative strategy firms on the East Coast. The kind of place where talent was valued and innovation wasn't treated like a threat. I didn't even have to apply. One of my former clients, one who hadn't been blinded by Brandon's smoke and mirrors, had reached out after hearing I'd left Fairmount. "We'd be lucky to have you," she said. "I've seen what you can do. I'd trust you with any campaign." So now, I was sitting in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, working on national-level campaigns, drinking iced oat milk lattes that didn't taste like bitter regret. I had a team who respected me, a manager who asked for my input, not just my output, and the quiet, potent satisfaction of knowing I had landed exactly where I was meant to be. And I hadn't said a word to anyone at Fairmount about it. Let them think I'd disappeared. Let Brandon assume I was licking my wounds somewhere, too defeated to fight. He could keep chasing ghosts while I built something real. I wasn't just winning, I was flourishing. And yet, I wasn't done. Because as sweet as success tasted, I knew there was one final string to pull, one more reckoning to deliver. The part where Brandon finally realized who had been behind the curtain the whole time. But not yet. Let him sweat a little longer. Let him question every email, every sideways glance, every glitch in his perfectly curated world. Because revenge, like good strategy, is all about timing. And mine was just getting started. The thing about a toxic leader is that they never expect the toxicity to backfire. They assume people will always put up with it, because they need the paycheck, because they're scared, because they're too tired to fight. And for a while, that's true. We all played along. We smiled through the passive aggression, stayed late through the empty praise, bent ourselves into quieter shapes just to survive the week. But people only bend so far before they snap. And Brandon? He had no idea how close to breaking his department really was. It started with Jules. She'd been there even longer than I had, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She never complained, never pushed back, just quietly endured. We weren't close anymore, not after she stood silently by when I was fired, but I understood her. I knew she was just trying to survive, like the rest of us. But something in her shifted. Maybe it was watching me walk out of that office with a cardboard box. Maybe it was seeing Brandon stumble through meeting after meeting like a man who'd never done the actual work. Or maybe it was just her finally having enough. One Tuesday morning, she walked into his office, handed him a folded letter, and said, "I'm done." Brandon laughed. "Is this a joke?" "No," she said. "It's my resignation." He blinked. "You can't just leave." "I can. And I am. I'm tired, Brandon. I'm tired of doing the work and getting blamed when you forget what you promised. I'm tired of pretending this place isn't bleeding out from the inside." Then she turned and walked out, leaving his office door swinging open. It was a domino after that. 2 junior strategists left within a week. The analytics lead announced he was pursuing other interests. 1 intern ghosted mid-project. HR scrambled to start exit interviews. Morale tanked. The team was crumbling, and Brandon couldn't plug the holes fast enough. Nate kept me updated. "He's completely losing it," he said during a late-night call. "You can tell he's not sleeping. He snapped at a client today and then tried to blame the assistant for scheduling the call wrong. The assistant quit by lunch." "Do they know why people are leaving?" I asked. "Not officially, but the whispers are everywhere. People are sick of the lies, the power games, the empty promises. You'd be proud." I was, but it wasn't pride that burned in my chest as I hung up the phone. It was satisfaction, cold, steady satisfaction. Brandon was finally standing in the mess he made, and for the first time, no one was cleaning it up for him. It was bound to happen eventually. Brandon might have been arrogant, blind to anything outside his reflection. But he wasn't stupid. When your perfectly controlled empire starts collapsing piece by piece, when your team walks out, your projects fail, your home feels like a stranger's house, you start looking for a common thread. And Brandon found one. Me. Nate was the first to sense it. "He's asking questions," he texted one morning. "Started with Jules before she left. Has Veronica been in touch? Did she say anything before she quit? He's circling." I almost laughed. I hadn't quit, of course. I'd been fired, tossed out like dead weight by a man who believed he'd won. But now? Now he was watching the walls close in, and he was starting to realize that maybe the quiet girl with the good ideas had walked out holding more than just a cardboard box. Maybe she'd walked out with a grudge. By the end of the week, he was desperate. Nate overheard him in the hallway, whispering furiously on the phone. "I know she's behind this. None of this started until after she left. It's too clean, too timed." His paranoia became office legend. He checked his inbox obsessively, flipped out over a mislabeled drive, demanding to know if it was planted. Started searching the Slack archives like he was hunting for buried clues. He even went as far as calling one of my former clients to check in, only to be politely told they were thrilled with the work I was doing at Larkin Row. That hit him hard, because not only was I still working, I was thriving, at a better firm, on bigger projects, and he had no way to touch me. So he tried to find me. Nate said he asked around, casual questions at first. "Anyone know where Veronica ended up? Did she move out of the city?" Then more persistent. "Can someone get her number? Just want to—" "Clear the air." Clear the air. That one made me snort. He didn't want peace. He wanted control, but I didn't give it to him. I blocked his old number, locked down my socials, made sure everything I posted was either vague or completely unrelated to work. I became a digital ghost, just a whisper, just enough for him to know I was out there and doing better than ever. Because nothing drives a man like Brandon crazier than a woman who won't give him the satisfaction of a response. He wanted closure. I gave him silence, and it was driving him mad. By the time Brandon handed in his resignation, the office had all but turned against him. The last few holdouts in his department were either actively looking elsewhere or barely pretending to care. Campaigns were stalling, clients were backing off, and HR had started asking quiet questions about departmental leadership. It wasn't dramatic. He would never allow that. Brandon Carter didn't do breakdowns. He did exits. Smooth, controlled, spin-ready. At least, that's what he told himself. The truth was, he had lost, and he knew it. He stopped showing up to the office every day. When he did, he looked like a man who had aged a decade in a month. The trim suits were replaced by wrinkled button-downs. His charm, hollow. His smile, tight. Everyone could feel it. His power, slipping away like water through his fingers. And still, he searched for me. He messaged an old coworker on LinkedIn, asking if I'd moved on, or if I was still involved in Fairmount's orbit. He even emailed Jules, who never answered. Nate told me Brandon had called him twice. Once just to ask, was it her? Nate didn't confirm. He didn't need to. By the time Brandon typed out his resignation email and hit send, he wasn't just stepping down, he was giving up. And that's when I decided to finally show up. Timing, after all, was everything. I arrived at Fairmount's lobby the next morning dressed in soft power. Clean lines, sharp heels, confidence stitched into every step. I had a client meeting across the street. Larkin Row had taken over one of Fairmount's biggest former accounts. The irony wasn't lost on me. He saw me before I saw him. I felt it, the stillness, like air sucked out of the room. I turned, slow and steady, and there he was, standing by the security desk with his resignation folder in hand, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Veronica," he said, breathless. I smiled. Not cruel, not sweet, just calm. "Hi, Brandon." He stared at me for a moment, trying to find his footing. How are you?" "Thriving," I said. "You?" He looked down at the envelope in his hand, then back up, eyes tight. "You did this." I tilted my head. "Did what?" You sabotaged me. I let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. I just left, Brandon. You handled the rest. That was what broke him. Not the campaign sabotage, not the whispers, not even the crumbling marriage. It was the realization that I didn't have to do much at all. He was the architect of his own ruin. I just stopped covering for him. He looked away first. I'm leaving, he muttered like it would sting. I know, I said, nodding toward the folder. You always were better at exits than leadership. I didn't wait for him to answer. I turned and walked away, heels tapping against the marble like a quiet drum roll. He didn't call after me, didn't try to chase, because he knew. He had lost. And for the first time in his life, there was no one left to blame.